Hi everyone, my name is Matisse. I'm the Director of Engagement at Queer History Boston. Welcome. Welcome to our first event since changing our name. We were the History Project for 45 years and we just changed our name to Queer History Boston. Though we do more than Boston and we do the full LGBTQIA2S plus spectrum. But welcome. If you haven't yet, check out our brand new website. It is beautiful, in my opinion, my humble opinion. We worked with an amazing designer named Joelle Riffle. You can check it out here and plugging our Instagram as well. Once again, all new Queer History Boston, very fun, very exciting. Just getting the plugs for the new name out of the way. Welcome, everyone. We are here to talk with Raymond from the Gorey House. We're doing a curator talk. Where it's entitled "A Curious Discovery: Queer Subtext in Edward Gorey's Work," which is very exciting. I'm gonna read Cohen's bio now. Cohen Raymond is the Associate Director and Archivist at the Edward Gorey House in Yarmouthport, Massachusetts. With a deep knowledge of Gorey's art, writing, and personal history, Raymond has worked extensively with the museum's collection to interpret Gorey's work for new audiences. The research highlights the intersections of literature, visual art, and queer identity, bringing fresh insights to one of the 20th century's most enigmatic creators. Everyone, I'm going to turn it on over to Cohen.
Thanks, Matisse. That is the nicest biography anyone's ever written about me. I'm usually just like, I'm this guy that shows up and knows a lot about Gorey, which is true. I do. I've been here for about 4.5 years. I've been working with Gorey for a long time. My parents actually knew him back in the day, so I feel like I'm a bit of a nepo baby. But he's long dead. So I'm really excited to be here. Thank you to Matisse and Queer History Boston for inviting the house and me to come chat about Gorey. I'm going to start with sort of a brief overview of who this guy was for those of you who know him and those of you who don't know him. Maybe you'll learn something new. Maybe you won't. Both of those are okay. Let me figure out how to change my slide. I got it. So a lot of people who are tangentially aware of Gorey's work have a vague notion that he was born in the 1800s on the moors in England or Scotland somewhere. But unfortunately, as compelling and picturesque as this would be, he was born in 1925 in Chicago to a crime reporter father and a stay-at-home mother. The most interesting thing about his childhood, aside from a voracious reading habit and a brief interlude where he had an alligator as a pet, was that his father once ran off briefly with an actress from Casablanca. He did come back after that, but aside from that, Gorey's childhood was not really remarkable or tragic. In his own words, he said he was out playing kick the can along with everyone else. His sole formal artistic training was during his teenage years, mostly at the Francis Parker School in Chicago, where he did remarkably poorly in athletics, but well enough in art to make it into some local newspapers. He was quickly drafted after graduation and found himself at the Dugway Proving Grounds in Utah, where he was promptly deemed to be entirely useless to the American military. During his time in the Army, however, he received a cursory education in Japanese art, culture, and literature, which sparked an interest that would stay with him for the rest of his life. I've included an image of Gorey in a rare beardless state. No, he was not born with one. And a early drawing featuring his first ever skull moon, which is a motif you'll see pop up a lot in his work. After the end of World War II, Gorey was enrolled at Harvard as, does anyone want to take a guess at what he majored in? I make everyone do this and it's horrible, I'm sorry. But no one has ever gotten it correct, so I think it's very fun to torture you all. Just put your guesses in the chat because I love doing this. It's really not what you would expect. My favorite answer I think so far has been physics, which like, God, I wish that would be so cool. Not architecture, not French either. Business would be actually hilarious, business or economics. And I feel like Gorey would do something fun with mathematics. It was actually French literature. So French is not that far off, but French literature is an entirely different can of worms because it's way more useless than French. So he threw himself headlong into the arts and culture at Harvard while he was there. Academically, he sort of oscillated between being on the dean's list and the threat of expulsion. Creatively, he really blossomed. He was a founding member of the Legendary Poets Theater. I saw someone in chat just mentioned the current Harvard exhibit. We went out for the opening. Highly recommend checking it out. They've done a fantastic job and they have some work I'd never seen before, which is saying something. Definitely go check it out. So the Poets Theater he helped found alongside his roommate, the poet Frank O'Hara, which you probably have heard of him. The two of them shared a dining room table that was a tombstone that they stole from a local cemetery. Don't ask me whose it was or if it got back to where it was supposed to be. I have no idea. Gorey, during this time, produced a significant body of written and illustrated work that began to define his lifelong style. I'm going to let the Harvard people talk about this more if you go check it out, but he's drawing a lot of very specific. Uh, it's a lot of guys in fur coats, and they all have really weirdly shaped heads. We call them ear brasses. I'm not going to spoil why. Go check out the exhibit. Uh, it was kind of an odd time to be at Harvard. He was 6'2". He had a very out of fashion beard and generally dressed how he wanted. And he was attending Harvard during the Lavender Scare of the 40s and 50s. I've included an illustration here that he did about Harvard. It's a satirical piece about hate crimes, basically. So as much as he got out of Harvard, it was also just a difficult time to be the kind of person that Gorey was. After graduation, his friend Barbara Epstein offered Gorey a position as typesetter and cover illustrator at Doubleday Anchor Paperbacks in New York City. This launched his career as a commercial artist, which was a job that would stay with him for the rest of his life. He built a massive portfolio of commercial work for publishing houses, including Looking Glass Library and Bobbs Merrill, alongside his Doubleday work. His covers, I'm like getting off topic here, but they are so beautiful. And there's a lot that no one has really seen before. This is one of my personal favorites. The Second Sin by Joseph Zaz. Don't ask me what's it about. I think it's psychology, but look at that demon. Anyways, his old cover art is just so remarkable. So he was producing a lot of commercial work. He eventually went freelance in the 60s, but during his time at Doubleday Anchor, he was working with people like Andy Warhol. He ended up with Yoko Ono's phone number at one point, I think, and Will Shortz, the crossword guy. So that's a completely useless fun fact for your next gathering. At the same time he was doing all of this commercial work, he was building his career as an independent author slash illustrator with the publication of a lot of mysterious little books that no one really knew what to do with. They were all like this big and they were all stapled together. Um, and they were kind of horrible. Slides are not frozen. I haven't gotten there yet. Promise there's more interesting stuff coming. These books included titles like The Listing Attic, which is just a book of really freaky limericks, one of which is that Harvard one I've posted up there, and The Beastly Baby, which is a book about a really horrible baby that everyone wants dead. There's no other way to describe that book. I'm sorry. These books weren't necessarily popular, but they did catch on eventually among the right sort of people. And soon enough, he had his own little shelf at the legendary Gotham Book Mart and his own private imprint that he founded called the Fantod Press. It was also during this time that he developed his undying passion for the ballet, and more specifically for the work of George Balanchine. I'm not going to talk too much about this because I know absolutely nothing about ballet and I'm not going to pretend that I do, but I will tell you that the rumors of Gorey having attended every single performance of the New York City Ballet are exaggerated, but not that much. The house has a collection of literally thousands of tickets. He was there constantly. His New York City years were some of the busiest of his life, and they were very full. But as for his time on the Cape, he spent summers here with his family, where he not only cooked for them full time, but continued work on his own books, his collaborations with other authors, his commercial work, and got involved with local theatrical productions. This, of course, brings us to Dracula. Gorey's biggest break, and one of the things he's best known for, aside from his opener to Masterpiece Mystery, is his work for the Broadway production of Dracula. He did the sets and costumes. It started on Nantucket and was eventually brought to Broadway. And he ended up winning 2 entire Tony Awards for his work. One of them was for Best Revival, and the other one was for Best Costumes, which made him incredibly irritated because he was like, it's just 5 crappy little costumes. Why didn't I get it for sets? So he skipped the award ceremony and went to the ballet instead, which just shows you the value of not going to events you say you're going to. So the success of the play, he got a percentage of every ticket sale. They definitely don't do it like that anymore, but it led him to buying the house I'm currently sitting in. He lived here from his first move to the Cape in 1980 until his death in 2000, with somewhere between 5 to 9 cats at any time and approximately 26,000 books. That is more than a lot of local libraries down here. His late career years were really filled to the brim with reading all of the books, printmaking, fabric arts, absurdist theater, somehow even more commercial work, some really bad pottery, illustrations for local dog walkers, and watching a lot of Star Trek. Now that we've got sort of a brief bio out of the way and hopefully you have a sense of who this guy was, I want to start off with a bit of a disclaimer. Gorey himself found self-identification as a queer artist with capital letters to be, I'm quoting him directly, hogwash. He was not interested in labeling himself outside of just as a human. I am personally not interested in excavating his life for answers about his identity or for content. That's not my job, and I don't feel comfortable doing that, so I'm not going to do it. What I am interested in is curating a nuanced conversation between me, someone who knows Gorey pretty well at this point, and you, an audience with varying levels of intimacy with his work, but who each have varying levels of experience and practicing and thoughts on queer representation in art and literature. The intention of tonight is to acknowledge the prodigious legacy that Gorey left behind of artwork featuring same-gender attraction, asexual thought, and the subversion of gender norms, and to discuss his approach to symbolism and meaning. I'm sure some of you are like, oh yeah, of course there's queer themes in Gorey's work. Here's my favorite book and what it meant to me and the impact it had on me and my favorite interpretation of it. And others of you will be like, is this the same guy who wrote the Dead Kid alphabet? To which I say, yes, it is the same guy. I'm sorry. Uh, I hope that no matter where you're coming from with your approach to Gorey's work, each of you will come away from this discussion with a new appreciation for how he approaches these really complex themes and new questions to ask about his work. So for this discussion, I encourage you to send over questions. We're going to have a Q&A session at the end, so you can either hang on to them or throw them in the chat. I'm going to lob ideas and interpretations at you from every direction, so make sure you duck. I make no guarantee that any of them are correct or a reflection of what Gorey personally thought or felt, but I can guarantee you that he would hate everything I have to say tonight. So luckily he's not here to stop me. So I'm going to start off with a book that a lot of you are probably familiar with. It's The Doubtful Guest, published, as it says, by Doubleday in 1957. It is second only to the Gastrochrome Tinies for popularity in the Gorey canon. And I'm going to take a drink of water and then tell you about it. So The Doubtful Guest is one of his rare books where nobody dies or is horribly dismembered in some way. It is beloved among adults and children alike for its silly, vaguely spooky story of a scarf and sneakers wearing creature who shows up one day at the house of an otherwise perfectly ordinary Victorian family, wreaks mild havoc, and never leaves. It eats dishes, it hides in tureens, it steals towels, idles in empty fireplaces, tears pages out of books, and is generally a nuisance. The guest rejects both identifiable gender, at least to us, and identifiable form. House visitors and Gorey readers often point it out as that penguin with the scarf on, but how many penguins do you know wear Converse sneakers or stare at you unblinking out of enormous golf ball eyes? Where's its beak? I don't have the answer to any of these questions. While The Guest isn't one of Gorey's more obviously queer books, the depiction of an uninvited and unhelpful creature appearing into an inoffensive pseudo-nuclear family is strongly and sometimes painfully relatable for any black sheep. The guest itself probably sees its behavior as completely acceptable. It holds routines, it maintains a preferred style of dress, it collects items it's fond of. Its daily life is, to the best of our knowledge, completely ordinary for it. But to its newfound family, its actions are outrageous. When it becomes fond of objects, for example, a pocket watch, it protects them by tossing them into a pond, which presumably destroys the function the family bought it for. The uneasy peace brokered by the end of the story isn't love, it's an approximation of tolerance. It came 17 years ago, and to this day, says the narrator, it shows no signs of going away. Is this a depiction of an LGBTQ plus coming of age story? Probably not. But the story of being the odd man out is by no means restricted to queer protagonists. But how painfully familiar it is for closeted children of heteronormative families to experience this doomed enterprise of existing as yourself without damaging everything around you. At best, you're an inconvenience to be tolerated, and at worst, you are a threat to their way of life. When we look at the guest through the lens of gender, that is to say the guest's absence of gender, and the family's reliance on gender norms, this feeling of recognition only grows. Over the course of the story, a young boy grows into adulthood in the midst of the guest's antics. If you really want to get into the weeds, you could argue that the guest is the repressed desires of a closeted youth made manifest, but at this, Gorey would definitely roll his eyes. We may find comfort in the fact that by the end of the story, the guest remains, 17 years later, wholly and entirely itself, with not a word of apology or explanation or anything else, and no plate left unnibbled in the house. I've also included some of Gorey's original sketches for the visitor, which make me really glad he didn't give it visible ears. But that's just me. So our next book, I'm going to warn you, is kind of a sad one. L'Heure Bleue is one of my personal all-time favorite Gorey publications or anything he did. It was self-published by Edward's Fantod Press in 1975, and it is perhaps one of the most profound and specific examples of if you know, you know, in any of his work. The book is entirely illustrated in black, white, and a particularly striking shade of blue that I have not managed to recreate in my PowerPoint software. It opens with the message of one enough. I'm going to let you fill in the blanks there. This banner of text, gazed upon by the two sole characters in the book, arches over their heads in an ambiguous command. It is impossible to follow as is. You, the reader, may only detangle their instructions if you fill in the missing blanks yourself. The rest of the book follows along the same nebulous lines. Reading the dialogue of the characters, both named T, feels as hazy as the outline of your hand when the light of the day is almost gone. What is food? Asks T. It's a small town in New Hampshire, answers T. And the creatures themselves are neither dogs nor really anything else. What are we, the readers, to make of this? Edward, of course, delights in his nonsense and our subsequent mystification. The book, in one light, ends here, its answers missing in the quintessential Gorey state of permanent open-endedness. It's a funny book if you don't really pick at it too much. But if you let the sun move past the horizon, the shadows elongate and the conversations take on more of a cobalt hue. As I always say, remarks T. I know you do, replies T, although I don't believe I've ever actually heard you. Below L'Heure Bleu's mysterious command, T and T hold up cards with possible letters to fill in the blanks. One offers us an R and an O, and the other has Z, D, E, and M. On their own, neither have the complete answer to the puzzle. The solution, if you can call it a solution, can only be found in their union. But as the conversations jumble together in a gorgeous cacophony of nonsense, it really is a lovely book, we realize that the two cannot understand each other. What an unimaginable tragedy that is to see yourself so clearly paralleled in another and to be so profoundly misunderstood by them. I mentioned earlier that I really do not want to pick apart Edward's personal life, and I meant that. But it would be leaving out crucial context if I didn't tell you that this book was written the year after Edward, also known as Ted, met his friend Tom Fitzharris. After Fitzharris, a fan, wrote Gorey in 1974 with a request for an autograph, the two men quickly became close friends and exchanged dozens of letters over the next year. A selection of these letters were recently published in From Ted to Tom. I'm not sponsored. And if you flip through that book for more than like a couple seconds, you'll see that the letters are really Edward at his best and most personal. They're filled with detailed illustrations of the two dog creatures, meticulously curated quotations from his favorite authors, and it's packed with very dry, self-effacing humor, and it offers a brief but lovely window into the days that T and T, Ted and Tom, spent together. Over time, the closeness between the two men sort of faded away, and Gorey's letters stopped coming, save for one wistful little unsigned note years later that said, to quote Tom, not Ted, one can't predict how things will end or how they'll run their course. Neither, to the best of my understanding, saw this as a tragedy, but more the natural conclusion of something lovely and important to both of them. In one letter, an illustration of glass bottles is accompanied by Gorey's explanation, which is one of my favorite things he's ever written, that all the blue bottles are a recollection of a window full of them in one of the antique shops I stopped in after you left that Sunday. The sun coming through them is not reproducible, at least by me. These letters are a gorgeous chronicle of a brief but powerful moment in Gorey's life and a meaningful friendship in Tom's. When we return to L'Heure Bleue with the context of From Ted to Tom, it reads as a continuation of the letters rather than a cryptic standalone nonsense art piece. Gorey has created a dialogue of a dialogue, two beings who continue to reach out for each other in the only way they know how, without fully being able to communicate with each other. The L in their flashcards is missing. It's never in the book anywhere. I keep forgetting everything you say is connected, T comments to his opposite. If this breaks your heart, it's really your own responsibility. Edward's going to let you find your own way to food New Hampshire because he's busy elsewhere. So on a much lighter note, I'm going to talk about The Curious Sofa, which is a ridiculous book. I'm going to warn you now. I'm also going to give you a second to read the reviews I have paired this image with because I spent a really long time looking for them and they make me laugh. So I'll explain. We get a lot of people who come to the house and flip through everything in our gift shop. And sometimes, maybe a couple times a year, someone will come and they will not make eye contact with me and they will buy the Curious Sofa and they will leave immediately. And I always think, you are about to be so disappointed later, and I'm so sorry. The subtitle of The Curious Sofa is, of course, a pornographic work by Ogdred Weary, one of Edward's many pseudonyms. If you assume it's titillating, you're going to be disappointed. The Curious Sofa is a book described by its author as being about a girl who really likes to eat grapes. You can see the grapes in the illustration. It is a book about eating grapes. Alice, the grape eater in question, bounces from vaguely indecent interaction to interaction, dallying with well endowed young men, sympathetic young maids, and guests with anatomical peculiarities. The book's romps reach a fever pitch when a lady named Elsie dies after a gentleman does something terrible to her with a saucepan, and Sir Egbert activates some infernal machinery in his titular sofa. By now, you're probably getting the impression that this isn't an average gory book, and you would be right. One term that the ever reticent Gorey did describe himself with is, quote, undersexed. In interviews, he was referred to as, quote, asexual, and biographer Mark Derry refers to him as a, quote, lovable eunuch. I have no comment on that one. However you categorize him, and I would warn you that doing so is ultimately going to be futile, the representation of what we would now probably call asexuality is clearly present in Gorey's work. In a 1980 interview with Lisa Solod, Gorey gives a unusually complete explanation of the Curious Sofa, or at least as close as he ever gets to giving one. He tells us that, quote, the whole point of the Curious Sofa is that it was not totally not illustrated. I'd rather die than do pornographic drawings. Oh God, it's so boring. He then goes on to explain that the sofa is a parody of a book called The Story of O, which he found utterly ridiculous. For those of you without a working knowledge of mid-century smut, The Story of O is a groundbreaking 1954 erotica novel by French literary critic and card-carrying bisexual Anne-Cécile Declos. You may read this on your own time. I'm not going to get into it too much. But in short, the story of O follows the experiences of a young woman referred to only as O, pictured on the right here on the slide, in her interactions with both men and women in an exploration of power dynamics. The sofa is, on the surface, a parody of pornography by a man who is generally repulsed and bored by sex. It's a clear nose thumbing at the allegations of his work, to quote the derisive artist himself, seething with repressed sexuality. Unfortunately for Gorey, nobody can really ever let sleeping dogs lie when it comes to his work. Certainly not me. The sofa serves as a mocking but not cruel mirror to what we're looking at. Is it pornography? Only as much as the reader sees it as. Is it queer? Aside from its seething asexuality, the book is full of mixed and same-gender couples, thruples, and so on. But if you're not looking for anything more than what we're given, it's just Alice eating some grapes with another lovely young lady. Nobody is ever nude in this book. I cannot stress that enough. Do not buy this book if you're looking for nudity. Does this bore you? Well, if Edward can sit through the story of O, we can survive the sofa. That feels fair to me. So before we get off of the sofa entirely and into our next book, I am going to take a brief detour into a discussion of Gorey's representations of gender, because that is something that is particularly interesting to me, and hopefully to you. So Gorey draws his references from across time and space and different cultures. Edwardian fashion is paired with Converse sneakers, or with detailed kimonos, and children in Victorian frocks are watching CRT TVs. His characters, likewise, are pulled from various eras, but the way he chooses to depict women versus men is very different. So his men, on the whole, this can be nitpicked, but bear with me, generally fall into the same silhouettes. They have short hair, long legs, and longer coats. They often wear full beards or mustaches, and they generally follow Victorian to Edwardian conventions of aesthetics and personal grooming. They don't really belong to one era in particular, but borrow the collegiate sweaters of the 20s and pair them with keds, top hats, or full-length coats. Some are mild-faced and wear well-cut suits and don't offer anything to us but a traditional display of conventional masculinity. Others are hairy-chested and broad-shouldered and pose with their bare muscles tensed. And still others wear obscenely tight pants and stare at you from coal-lined eyes. Gorey's women, on the other hand, tend to be much more clearly defined archetypes than his men. They are the flapper, the vamp, the spinster, the governess. You've got a lot of different options here. The vast majority of his women are, as a rule, almost androgynous in their build. And I'm not comparing thinness to androgyny. I'm saying they don't have any secondary sex characteristics at all. You can see a lot of the women are wearing dresses that would normally expose their chests. There's nothing there. Many are distinguishable from men only in their hair or their dress or their names. Some hunch over mouse-like in cardigans or pantsuits, and others stand with their arms crossed or their hands on their hips in frozen moments of athleticism or poise. Others offer us sort of an antiseptic interpretation of an S curve in Victorian petticoats, with their hips to one side and their hands posed very delicately in front of them. They run the gamut from almost boyish to traditionally feminine, but all of them, to put it bluntly, aren't sexy. They are completely lacking in passion or eroticism, if not sensuality. So, what's going on here? There's a few different ways to look at this. So, first, Gorey, as I mentioned, heavily relies on symbols in his work. He takes objects that we know, umbrellas, urns, gazebos, veils, and places them into new and unsettling contexts. One of my favorite Gorey books and one of Matisse's favorite Gorey books is Les Passementeries Horribles. It's a it's a book where Gorey draws these really intricate tassels. They were actually found in a box next to his bed after his passing. They're real tassels. He drew them large and hovering in midair over unsuspecting subjects like some sort of Lovecraftian tentacled vampiric beast. It's genuinely a really creepy and beautiful book. Uh, I don't recommend searching for it online because it's not in print anymore and it will cost you hundreds of dollars, but it is in one of the amphigories, so you can still read it. It's very good. So, similarly to these objects, his characters have similar roles. They represent times and places and professions and social statuses, and types of people that he then goes on to bastardize entirely. You've got the high class mixed with the low class, you've got the keds with the fur coats. But while the men and the women are both caricatures in Gorey's work, his women are filling much more specific roles. Again, you've got the flapper, the governess. But what makes his use of these symbols so remarkable is that no matter how overblown or how vampy or how sensual they are, his women are almost dispassionate in their lack of sexualization. I don't really have time to do a full analysis of women depicted by queer men in art, so I'm not going to start that. But I bring up these depictions to highlight how he illustrated these two genders, and he did illustrate others. There's more than just men and women in his work, but it's such a remarkable depiction of womanhood. He is creating work in the language of a queer man's appreciation of style, camp, and the performance of the feminine. It's fascinating to me how Gorey manages, even in the most ostensibly sexual drawings of women, to desexualize these caricatures. To put the whole thing really simply, his men are action figures and his women are paper dolls. The men are they retain their sensuality. I'm not saying sexuality, but their sensuality with hairy forearms, and they're clearly full blooded and strong and shirtless often. But the women, no matter how tight of a corset they wear or how much eyeliner they have on, are so stereotypical and so desexed as to almost ascend past the base depiction of a pinup or a vamp and reach the platonic ideal of this feminine archetype. So, looking at these women, even in 2025, I am just continually amazed by how Gorey manages to assign women every single stereotype except for the one massive, inescapable one that women perpetually have to bear. And in doing so, offers us a new interpretation of these archetypes, which is why his work remains so compelling. For a male artist to illustrate a nearly nude, explicitly romantic, and yes, there's a caption with this is a romantic couple, a pair of women entangled, almost nude in each other's arms, and to have it completely be non-sexual because of how much they're drawn on symbolism and reference is unique and, to me, very liberating. So on this topic of gender, I will finally get us off of the couch and move us to Le Mélange Funeste. I'm sorry for speaking so much French tonight. So this one's kind of a weird pull, so bear with me. Even if you've never read it before, the premise of Le Mélange Funeste should be familiar to you. It's a book sliced into 3 sections horizontally. Each strip features a head, a torso, or a pair of legs. The reader flips the pages to create new combinations and new creatures. And it's Edward Gorey's take on the exquisite corpse. But it's much more intricate than you and I would have done in first grade or summer camp. It's a really lovely book. On a first flip through, it presents as one of Gorey's many experiments in the world of book arts. His penmanship is at its finest. He's clearly thinking a lot about these characters. And he offers us some familiar faces. We've got his robots, his insects, Victorian gentlewomen, oversized birds, seductresses, and mannequins, weirdly. But if you spend a little more time trying to match all these characters up, you will notice that while all of them line up really well, none of them have an original combination. So I'm going to show you something that a lot of people haven't seen before, which is the original artwork for Le Mélange Funeste, directly from the Gorey Trust archives. So if you look at these original sketches, you will see that Gorey actually illustrated these characters as jumbled up to begin with. They don't have one cohesive body. The maiden with the oversized hat, her torso is a sailor holding a black doll, and then her legs have a really ostentatious codpiece and a lot of body hair. When you look at the corpse that's holding a pair of chopsticks, its head is that of a young woman, and she's wearing striped stockings. The mustachioed farmhand has on a gorgeous ballet costume and chicken legs. I'm not really going to try to draw up some overarching narrative about this book because I think Gorey would probably smite me from somewhere. But I do want to point out just how interesting it is that it reveals so much about his process. It's objectively more difficult to draw these characters in this way. Far more than that, he made this decision knowing that his readers would not know he did so. This was a private decision. No one is going to see these drawings except us now. But no one was going to see them except for him and his publishers. Why would he do this? I'm not Gorey. I'm not going to answer that question. But it's fantastic to imagine Gorey at his drafting table meticulously lining up each tri-figure for no other reason than he wanted to. So I want to draw a quick parallel here between Le Mélange Funest's sort of secret history and surrealist work on identity. Dada and surrealism were cornerstones of all of Edward's work. If you look at another favorite of mine, his book called The Untitled Book, it's entirely written in gibberish. That's the best example I can give you of his surrealism. The exquisite corpse game itself was invented by a group of founding surrealist artists in the early 20th century. And when viewed in this context of surrealist thought, Funest immediately calls to mind surrealist interpretations of gender and the self. Most striking to me personally is the comparison between this book and the way Gorey illustrated it and German photo montage artist and bisexual Dada legend Hannah Hoch. If you are German and I'm saying that wrong, I'm sorry. I can't speak German. She made these really lovely feminist collages in which she cut up male and female bodies and sort of spliced them together into new interpretations and created entirely new beings. This idea that Gorey not only created a book for us to do the chopping ourselves, but quietly and privately interpreted these chopped up beings as whole and entire in and of themselves is one that I'm just really very fond of. This is another book that's kind of hard to find. I think there's a recent reissue in 2016 or so, but it's worth the hunt. It's a really fun little book. So the last book I'm going to talk about tonight before we start chatting about all of this is The Osbick Bird. It's a really gorgeous book. I told you I wasn't going to do anything as sad as L'Heure Bleue, and I meant it, but this one it's a little sad. It's a tender and thoughtful reflection on relationships and loss. And it remains a relatively obscure Gorey publication despite still being in print. I'm finally giving you one that you can go and buy. The story opens with an Osbick bird, and please do not ask me what this is. I do not know. Landing on a man named Embless Fingby's hat. I always say that wrong. One day with the intention of coming and living with him. So the man and the bird throughout the course of the book seamlessly merge lives. Their hobbies become shared, their daily routine is one, and they even match outfits, as you can see in this illustration. It's very cute. Eventually, by the end of the story, Embless passes away with the bird at his side, who mourns his death with a solitary vigil on his tombstone. But, says the narrator, after several months, one day, it changed its mind and flew away. The book ends on this distinctly melancholy note, and we're left staring at Embless's headstone all alone. The Oswick bird, to me, is pretty easy fruit here. Instead of frog and toad, we have bird and man. The beauty in their relationship, as Gorey lays it out for us, is not in the unique fact that it is either symbolically or literally an interspecies coupling, but in that is a loving and profound relationship, a connection that any two beings might have. Their relationship might look distinctly unusual to outsiders, but the two partners move through life just like anyone else, fighting over card games, for example, and taking long walks at sunset. If this wasn't enough, Gorey explicitly clarifies for us that they were both discreet. I'm not going to explain to you what that means. To some readers, their matching galoshes might not be enough to illuminate the true nature of their relationship, but we aren't so easily turned aside. The beauty of this relationship is paralleled by the ultimate tragedy of it. To quote Gorey himself, I realize that homosexuality is a serious problem for anyone who is. But then, of course, heterosexuality is a serious problem for anyone who is too. And being a man is a serious problem, and being a woman is too. Lots of things are problems. Embless and the Osbick bird, no matter how they look, are no more or no less than another problem in the long chain of love and loss that we all experience. With the Osbick bird, Gorey gives us Lobel for those of us who want a little bit of bitterness with our sweetness. It's a really great book. I again, it's one of the few I'm telling you to go read that is still in print, so you might as well do so. It is very cute. So to wrap things up, a mildly disgruntled Edward once commented that, as I mentioned, every now and then someone will say my books are seething with repressed sexuality. For a man whose great love of his life was, as you probably know, his cats, this is a reasonable complaint to make. Edward was neither antisocial nor kept his light or neon orange coyote fur coats under a bundle. To characterize him as a misanthrope with no emotional entanglements whatsoever is perhaps appealing to those who appreciate Gorey primarily as the granddaddy of goth. But if you pull up a recording or YouTube video, and there's plenty out there of him discussing his cats or the books he likes or the TV shows he's watching or his theater projects, the joy in his laughter and his gestures warms you just by listening. This is a man who was very loved and who cared a lot about the people around him. By his own choice, to label Edward as any one thing is impossible. I suppose I'm gay, he sighed once to an interviewer, but I don't really identify with it much. What I'm trying to say is that I am a person before I am anything else. Edward's work, when examined in any frame of reference, skirts the same edges as he himself did. It and he refused to be defined, despising explanations, and preferring instead to allow you to draw your own conclusions. After all, as he famously said, explaining something makes it go away, so to speak. What's important is left after you have explained everything else. In the Fraught Cité, he presents couples of various genders embracing each other with neither explanation nor apology. The focus is entirely on the QRV they're drinking. In the silhouettes of two men embracing in the shadows from an unpublished book called Les Interjections Essentielles, it speaks of something greater than the caption, Phi suggests, but we don't really know what it is. Gorey's representations of queerness are a mirror to our own. They're nothing more, but they're truly nothing less. So the last thing I'd like to leave you with is E. Gorey's great simple theory about art, as written to his collaborator and fellow children's author Peter Neumeyer. This is the theory that anything that is art is presumably about some certain thing, but is really always about something else. And it's no good having one without the other, because if you just have the something, it's boring. And if you have the something else, it's irritating. So that should leave you with something to chew on. I'd love to talk to you all, answer any questions you have or make something up on the spot entirely. Matisse, do you want to handle unmuting yourself and go from there?
Yes, I'm coming up. Hi, everyone. Wow, everyone, can we give like a round of applause for Cohen in hold on, I'm just pinning myself. I'm here. Round of applause. You can sound off in the chat. That was delightful and truly phenomenal. And I learned so much. I mean, we've talked so much endlessly about like queerness in Gorey's work in our times together. And I even learned so many new things and saw things from so many new perspectives. So thank you so much for sharing this. Y'all, get your questions ready. I'm going to ask Cohen just a couple questions to kind of get your curiosity brewing. So, and then everyone, just for today, I'm going to have you all write your questions out in the chat. So this will all give you a second to type as well. So, okay, my first question for you, Cohen, is, do you see Gorey's queerness across this work? You know, I mean, we picked out some really specific examples, right? Is it like, are we like diving for subtext in particular moments, or is this some sort of like texture that's woven across like his entire oeuvre, you know? Like,
That's the big question, isn't it? And I'm going to answer you in the most irritating way I can, just saying that, like, that is the question for any angle, right? There are people who come to the house who attended New York City Ballet for years, who were New York City Ballet dancers, who saw Edward Gorey at the New York City Ballet, and whose only work of his they've read is The Lavender Leotard. I don't know what those people are seeing in Gorey's work. I will never see it. It's a language of gestures and movements that is undeniably in all of his work. He's speaking the language of ballet here. It's not something that I see in his work. To me, it doesn't exist, not because I don't think it's there, I know it is, but because I don't speak that language. Gorey's work is just wrapped in mirrors and layers, and that's how he likes it. So while I'm going to sit here and say to you, yes, I have just talked to you for however many minutes about the fact that there is undeniably queerness in Gorey's work, someone without that experience is going to turn around and be like, I only see ballet. And I think both of those are completely okay.
absolutely. I mean, I think that having multiple perspectives is the fun thing about Edward Gorey's work. It is endlessly interpretable. That's the best. And I'm going to put it out there. That's very, honestly feels very like queer theory of me, of Gorey too, to be like endlessly interpretable. You know, there's
Layers on layers.
layers and layers. Um, I also feel like another part for me is like Gory's work sits in this like very, you know, there's a deep sadness and morbidity to it, while there's also wonderfully like whimsical and light. And for me, it feels very representative of like the in between of, you always hear those quotes from the 80s of people surviving the AIDS epidemic where they protest by day and are grieving and mourning their losses, and then at night they're out partying, and that's how they're healing. So I don't know, is there something about the light and like the sort of light and whimsy of Gory, and also like the darkness, the morbidity, the confrontation with mortality? For me, that I'm stretching to say that's queer, but like I don't know, what are you thinking about the sort of the tone of his books and sort of why people are uh, why do queer people like this? Maybe is maybe a better question.
Well, I'd like to hear that answer from some of the queer people in the audience, but I will tell you why I like it, and it is because of obviously that duality appeals to a lot of us. It's an intermingling of beauty and tragedy. It's a very Osbick Bird, um, and I think there is a legacy in queer history, a longer legacy than I could ever hope to speak to, of um, making wine out of some kind of crappy grapes. And Gory, while his life wasn't necessarily full of crappy grapes, he had a really unique ability to enter a beautiful scenario and pull the worst thing out of it. And he had the ability to enter a horrible scenario and create beautiful art out of it. And I do personally, this is me speaking, not the Edward Gorey House. I feel that there is a queerness in this way of looking at the world, right? It's a language that we sort of are taught to speak, not explicitly, but it's a world we work within. And I think Gory came out kicking and screaming and just utterly weird. Like the image of him as a child is still weird to me. Like that dude should have a beard and a fur coat and painted toenails. I know in my heart he does, but that's a baby. He's always been weird. And when you read about him talking about his work, or if you watch videos of him talking about his work, um, I'm trying to think of how to describe this. He makes it very clear that it makes him uncomfortable to revisit his work. It's almost like a purging he does. It's an involuntary almost instinct. I'm not saying there's not a lot of skill and talent and practice in it, but it's a natural extension of his self. And Gory's way of looking at the world, even if he would absolutely come down and hit me on the head very hard for saying this, is a queer view of the world, just because of who he was and the way he lived. And even if you make the argument to me that like nowhere did Gory explicitly say he was queer, that's completely fine. There is still a queerness in his work that is inescapable, and I think reaches a lot of people who maybe necessarily aren't queer themselves. It's a privilege when people come to the house and tell me that they grew up a black sheep and they found themselves in Gory's work, and whether or not those people identify as any one thing or another does not make that work any less powerful for them. And I think, again, even if you're not looking at it from a queer lens, that is an inextricably queer language.
Brilliantly said. I'm going to ask one more question and then I'm going to turn to you all. So everyone, you've had some time now. You got your questions ready? Um, my last question for you is, I'm just curious, as the archivist who gets to see not only the things that Gory has published, but a lot of the other things that are like behind the scenes, everything else that he got to see and witness and the life he built around himself. Is there anything in there that, the general public does not get to witness that kind of adds to the lore of, a queer sensibility to his works? Is there something else that you've been able to dig through the boxes and find? I don't know. Any
Sure.
secrets? Gossip,
Secrets are a complicated
rumors?
one. I feel like Edward as a person is both very close to and very far from Edward Gorey, the character, and he knew this. He was sort of he was aware he was doing a little bit of a put upon, but it still was inherently part of him. And I work in his house every day. I've slept in his bedroom. I sit on his couch. And this is the same couch where he spent night after night like sewing weird little dolls and watching Star Trek. And as someone who also makes weird little crafts and watches a lot of Star Trek, it's really refreshing to be able to see sort of the personal side of Gory. I don't know if it's secrets per se, but like we have a lot of we're currently redeveloping the house barn. We've got a big fundraiser project into an artist space, and that requires going through the barn and looking at a lot of this guy's crap. And I say crap lovingly. We have so much Buffy the Vampire Slayer merch. I can't, like, it's so much. I don't even know what we're gonna do with all of it. and so many like Star Trek Monopoly sets and like X-Files stuff. Um, it's really endearing because like this is an incredibly brilliant human being. Like the books this man read in his lifetime, none of us will ever come close to. Um, he quoted Borges like it was nothing and understood it too. And to know that like he intermingled like what we would consider maybe the intellectual with like the low is really delightful and something that I feel, you know, I can say everything about Gorey is queer because I'm allowed to. I work here. I feel that way. So I can say that. But it's, I don't know, it makes him human in a way that makes me really happy. I'm like, yeah, I would sit on the couch with this guy, sew something weird, and watch Buffy the Vampire Slayer. That sounds like an awesome night to me.
Yeah, I'm Colleen in the chat is saying like save some old Buffy merch. I'm like same. Like
Come get it. We have too much.
I'll be down there. Well, I'll holding you
I
to that. Okay.
actually,
Oh,
this is, I will show you. This is the most precious thing in my office right now. It's in my to be formally archived box. It is Edward Gorey's cutouts and small notes on Star Trek Deep Space Nine. I'm like,
incredible.
the desire to steal this is overwhelming. I don't know where I'd put it. I'd probably just turn around and put it back in the archives because that's where everything important goes. But like, it is so cool that we have this.
It's amazing. Okay, y'all, it's time to go to your questions because I'm sure y'all have a lot of great things to query. A first one will start from a note from Emily. I loved his work since before I knew I was queer and was just a baby goth. And every time I revisit it, it unfolds something new and fascinating that I hadn't caught before. Do you resonate with that?
Oh my God, I definitely do. I grew up reading Gory, so it's some of the first books I ever read. And I think like there's something just deeply strange about these books that appeals to a lot of people who feel that they are also deeply strange. People who are interesting come to the house. Sometimes people stumble in who are really uncomfortable about the whole thing, but they leave pretty quickly. The people who come for Gory are some of the most interesting and funny and confusing and just strange people that I've ever met. And I think it's wonderful that Gorey is like a stepping stone on a lot of people's paths to self-discovery because his work is about fundamentally being an outsider, and outsiders flock to him like crazy. It's really lovely.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, even if it's queer, not as LGBTQ, there's something deeply queer as in weird about Gory's work, you know?
That is true.
Um, okay, next question is from Jun Sato. Do you know what did Gory think about other queer artists, his contemporaries, who might have been a bit more out?
You want the tea. So I won't get into it too much because I don't want to comment on interpersonal relationships I don't know much about, but I will tell you that my quote about hogwash comes directly from him complaining about another artist he knew who said that like he made work about being a queer artist, and Gory just thought that was utter slop, really. He was like, this is not something that's interesting. Why would you ever make your identity, your work about this facet of your identity? That was repulsive to him, which I think is sort of antithetical to how a lot of us, I don't know, I don't want to like people in the modern age making art, especially of like younger generations, tend to make art about being queer. If that is something they're interested in, their art reflects that really strongly. And I think it's really interesting that Gory rejects that so vehemently on the surface, and then his work is full of this content. And I think it reflects, as I said, this really prodigious legacy of queerness existing in the margins and the mud puddles. That is, Gory's work would not be as compelling if it was blatant. I will also mention that Gory's work comes at a time when a lot of really beautiful children's literature was being produced by pretty much exclusively, the books I'm thinking about at least, gay artists. Strigonona is the one that's popping in my head right now, but he had a friendly working relationship with some of these artists and respected them. But I think if they were making like Frog and Toad get married at the Pride Parade, he would not have been with it. That's just not who he was, and I don't think that means these artists who are making work like that are doing something wrong. It's just not doing something gory.
Totally. Emery asks, or really comments, I think much of his work is an outsider's view of the world. And of course, that resonates with one of the most widespread outsider, the queer person. Any comments on outsiderness in Gory's work?
I that's my whole thesis. I feel very strongly that that is correct. Um, Yeah, I don't think can add anything to that that hasn't already been said by it. It's work for outsiders by an outsider. And I think that's a really good thing, no matter how you look at it.
Once again, reiterating, someone will buy the old Buffy merch that used to be owned by Edward Gorey. Just putting that out there once again.
If you all
Jules,
want to fight your way through the spider webs in the barn to come get it, be my guest.
you'll get to see some really beautiful things, like some of the old Dracula set pieces that are also living out in the barn, if I'm remembering correctly.
They're set pieces from like Jacob's Pillow and some like Ashicum Tiny's plays, and I think we've got a couple of PBS mystery things. I've lost track. There's a lot of cool stuff in the barn.
I put a link to everyone for the barn fundraiser, so y'all better contribute, save this and make this important space even better. So, hey, Jules asks, how do you think that his work would have changed and been affected as the decades went on, and how the view of queerness has changed in the 21st century?
That's a great question, and something we weirdly have been talking a lot about in book club lately. Um, I think Gorey, no matter how you cut it, is going to be Edward Gorey. He passed away right when computers were becoming a thing. And I will tell you all something that most people don't have access to. Gorey actually did some digital artwork. It's really like, I don't want to say bad. It's rudimentary in a way that is really charming. Like, I would absolutely get a tattoo of some of his like pixel art cats that are really janky that he did for like a local media center. Um, and I think he probably would have gotten really into eBay, but I think what interested Gorey was this intermingling of the modern and the historical, at least in an aesthetic sensibility. I don't know if his work really would have changed much in the modern day, except he would have had a lot less room in his house for buying stuff online. But that's my interpretation. I'm not saying that's correct or not correct. I always enjoy these sort of discussions with people of impossible to answer questions about Gorey.
I also do want to highlight that anachronism, I think, is another thing that Gory does well, and that I think queer people are also drawn to, similarly to this like whimsy and goth at the same time. I think a lot of people really love anachronism. There's some really great queer theorists out there, like Jose Munoz, who talks about like anachronism and queering the past to move to the future. That I think really speaks to that. And I'm not going to speak to it more than that, but I do think that that's an element that a lot of gay people love. You know.
Oh, definitely.
Um, this is not on the topic of LGBTQ queerness in, well, maybe it really is. Okay, Emily asks, I desperately want to know some of his DS9 thoughts. Can you please read one or two?
Oh,
You
Emily, you're
have
about to
them
be
right there.
disappointed. So he rarely actually wrote down his thoughts on the episode. It was mostly when he was watching them. I can tell you that he missed a couple episodes and was irritated about it. Um, and I will also tell you that this is my personal like tinfoil hat theory. He has a couple characters in drafts that are named Odo and Kira, and I'm always like, are you ripping off DS9? I hope you are. So I will. It's yeah. I can show you. It's really just cutouts of the new the TV guides with his handwriting on them. But like seeing the words Empok Nor and Edward Gorey's handwriting as a Star Trek nerd is very cool. So I'm sorry I don't have more info for you, but I can tell you that he was a very serious Trekkie, as serious as any of us get, really.
Um, I mean, I feel like you've already sort of gotten to this, but what do you think Gory himself would think about the fact that so many people just like laser beam right through him, see him as a queer icon? Do you know what I mean?
Oh,
Would
he'd
he do
hate
something
it.
like, would he be annoyed? Would he delight? Would he like arch a little eyebrow? Very like, what, yeah, he would hate it. What else? What else?
He would really. I think he'd be uncomfortable. You know, there's this
Mm.
we always tell guests who come to the house, like Gory would hate that his house is a museum. He would hate that people have written books on his work. He would hate that he has a biography. Um, it's not who he is, and I think we have the sort of dubious privilege of existing after Gory that we can pick him apart like this. But it's always that sort of uncomfortable, sticky sensation of looking through someone's underwear drawer when they're not there. I personally, like I said at the beginning of this, I am not interested in telling you any gossip about Gory's personal life. Do I know some stuff? Maybe. Is any of it true? Who knows? But he really, it is fundamental to who he was as an artist and a person to hide things. His work would not be interesting if he was like, the Osbick Bird and Endless Fingby are in a relationship. That would be nothing. That would be nothing for anyone. And that's also how he lived his life. He was an excruciatingly private person when it came to like personal um, interactions. He again had a very large social circle of people he cared about, but he was a private person, and he would not like me probably, and that's okay. It's not his job to like me. He's dead. He can't do anything about me anyways. I say this lovingly. I have a lot of respect for Edward, obviously. I work here and I work with his books on the daily. But I'm also aware that like I'm walking over his grave a little bit. And that is something we have to live with as people interested in doing a queer analysis of an artist who has passed, who chose to live in a semi-closeted state. I use closeted in sort of like a nebulous way. Like I'm not making an argument for or against the idea that Gorey did not feel safe identifying as anything. I think no matter if he felt safe or not safe, he wouldn't want to. That is not who he is.
I feel like that's like a perfect summary of a lot of the things that you were talking about this evening. We have one more question about specifically archives. And then I'm going to ask that one. So I know that this is from Rin. I know that the Edward Gorey Charitable Trust website states that the work on digitizing the Gorey archives has been an ongoing process. I'm curious if you know if the public will be able to see some of the digitization or at least item descriptions in the future.
I wish I could answer that question. The house and the trust are separate entities, and while we have a wonderful working relationship with a lot of people at the trust, I was just talking to Will a couple of weeks ago about illustrations Gorey did of tattooed people. They're really great folks, and they're working their butts off truly, but there's so much to go through that I don't know if they have a timeline even. Your best bet, unfortunately, and I promise I'm not sponsored, is going out and checking some of the new Gorey books that have been coming out. The trust has been uh what's the right way of putting this? They've been more lenient in the last few years, putting out previously unpublished information. They have, for very good reasons, been pretty, you can't play all your cards at once. The dude just died 20 something years ago. But the last few books that have come out, there's the House's collaboration with the Trust, E is for Edward. And there is Carol Verberg's book, which I always forget, the Theatrical Adventures of Edward Gorey. Both of those have some previously unpublished work in them that are pretty interesting. If you're not in a position to shell out $60 for a book, which who is, go to the library. It'll be there soon enough. The E is for Edward just came out, but it's worth checking out. Our director, Greg Hischak, compiled 10 years of house exhibits in there, and there's some really lovely reproductions of some of the stuff in the archives. Other than that, what you can do also is come to the house every year. We have original artwork on display from the trust, some of which has not been seen before. They're very generous. They lend us pretty much anything we ask for, and it's a real treat. So I'm sorry I don't have a better answer for you, but it might be worth dropping the trust a line. They're usually pretty helpful.
Yeah. And y'all, you should make sure, I mean, if you haven't been to the museum, like go. They do an amazing job doing interpretive exhibits. It's such a treat to be in the space. As someone who's been able to go several times and see some of the behind the scenes, it really is just an incredible space to be in, knowing that you've been in the space with such an incredible artist like Edward Gorey. And also, once again, I'm going to highlight that the team there, Cohen and Greg, you all do an incredible job interpreting Gorey and making these really rich, fun to chew on exhibits about Gorey's work. So I just want to really plug once again, y'all should really make your way there if you haven't been there yet. Help support the barn fundraiser. There's a lot of great events going on at the Gorey House. Sorry,
I'm
this
putting that in the chat right now.
we're going into plug mode. Everyone,
Brace yourselves.
brace yourselves. The Gorey House has a ton going on for spooky season, as the grandfather of goth. And also, we'll put out there that we're maybe doing another sort of collaboration in November, and it would be a great way for you to get to the house. So, anyways, we'll talk about that in a second. But yeah, Cohen, what's going on at the house in October?
So lots of cool things are going on at the house in October, Matisse. So first off, I will remind all of you, which obviously you've already entered, but the annual all ages envelope art contest has been extended this year into December because we were worried we weren't going to get enough entries because we announced it late. But our post on it went viral, and we have literally hundreds like right next to me that we have to go through. Please send us your envelopes. We do this every year. It's sort of in honor of Edward's, as I mentioned, prodigious legacy of envelope art. Our theme this year is the Evil Garden. I'm going to put the link in the chat right now. We do have prizes, but it's mostly just for the thrill of sending us an illustrated envelope. The prizes are okay. I'm not going to lie to you, but it's a tradition the house has been having for like 12 years or something crazy, 15. So that's a great thing to do if you can't physically get to the house. The other thing we have going on is the Mass Cultural Council has sponsored our Children's Story Hour this year, every Thursday through the end of this month. So there's only like 2 left. We are reading stories to mostly kids, but also sometimes adults. Most of these are gory picks. We have some other cool ones going on. And the last 2 we have going on are going to be sort of like spooky Halloween picks. So if you have a child that you don't know what to do with, throw them at us. Next up, we've got our annual Halloween Flash Day fundraiser. It's really fun. I personally keep collecting tattoos from the fundraiser. This is our 4th year now. It's our 3rd year at Hotline Studios in Hyannis. We will have a selection of gory related flash you can come check out. It's raffle based, so show up and you can get your raffle ticket and hang out. We can talk about gory and then you'll get a gory tattoo. It's a great way to spend a day, is having a needle jabbed in your arm repeatedly with strangers. It also helps support the house, which, doesn't hurt. And then we have something that I'm really excited about, which is the Silent Film Festival. It sold out so fast last year that we're like, well, obviously we have to do it again for this Halloween. And we picked 2 even more horrifying movies. It's basically 3 hours straight of people suffering. Edward was a huge silent film buff, so obviously we are continuing another legacy of entertaining ourselves via him. I will be making popcorn. The popcorn is okay. The movies are really kind of the selling point here. I'm putting a link to that in the chat as well. And then our book club, which I've noticed a couple names in here pop up of folks from our book club. So hello, I will see you shortly for discussion. In about a week and a half, we're going to be reading or discussing Edward's collection of ghost stories that he curated. It's called The Haunted Looking Glass. I have not yet read it because I'm bad, but I'm really genuinely excited about it. I love ghost stories. I think it'll be a really fun chat. We have remote and in-person book club. So if, again, you're not located in the area, you can still hang out with us and talk about ghost stories and Edward Gorey. But if you are in the area, I will be making snacks. So extra perk there. And then obviously Halloween at the house is right around the corner. We always do trick-or-treating and free admission for that night. And we're going to have like tarot card readings with Edward Gorey's tarot cards. We're going to have film portraits. We're going to have gory caricatures. It's always a good time. So you can come check that out. I also have to put that in the chat. I know how to do things. So through the winter, we're going to keep having our book club going, and then we reopen again in April, but we are open through the end of the year. So you've got plenty of time to come check out this year's exhibit, which is Mysterious Messages. It's Concealing the Art, Mysterious Messages of Edward Gorey. I always get it backwards. So we've got some original art on display. It's also his 100th birthday this year. So we really go into sort of a deep dive on like what Edward was trying to do with his work. The house is pretty cool. I am not going to lie to you. It is a nice place. I like being here. You'll probably enjoy it a lot. So definitely check out some of our events. I hope to see some of you here soon. And like Matisse said, Queer History Boston is organizing an event with us shortly that I'm not going to spill any beans on, but keep an eye on both of our newsletters. The House has a newsletter. Queer History Boston has a newsletter. Both of them are worth subscribing to.
Indeed. I'll spill a little beans. I'm going to tell you the date. It's on November 7th, which is, we're going to be doing a little after hours look at the exhibit. I have to figure out if we're going to rent a bus and get people from Boston, or if we're going to say people like meet us there, and we'll do a little chat there. TBD will be out next week. But thank you, Cohen. This was amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. This was amazing. What a delight to be able to witness this live. And thank you all to our audience for being here. We really, really appreciate you. And we love Edward Gorey. We love local New England house museums. We got to support local history, y'all. And Gorey is an important part of Cape Cod history, Massachusetts history, New England history, and history for us queers, goths, spooky ookies, and et cetera, et cetera. So thanks all for being here. Thanks, Cohen, and thanks, the Gorey House. And have a good night, everyone.
Thank you all so much.